I'm Jess Dakotas.
And I'm Nick Koziel. Welcome to That Sounds Terrifying, the podcast where we share terrifying stories, we share listener experiences, and we visit virtually some of the most haunted places in the United States and the world. Welcome back, everyone, to That Sounds Terrifying. I'm your host, Nick Koziel, along with my co-host, Jess Dakotas. And joining us today is another guest, Floyd Wills, who is the author of The Red-Haired Giants of Lovelock Cave and Other Mysteries. And he's coming on to talk a little bit about his book, but also about some experiences he's had. We're very excited to have you on the show. Welcome to the show, Floyd.
Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Nick and Jess, for having me on, and thanks to your audience for tuning in. I'm excited to go down the rabbit hole wherever you want to go. I've got a few paranormal experiences, and can talk about my book. So whatever direction you want to go,
Whatever
I'm ready
direction.
to roll.
So, I guess let's start with I want to hear just a little bit about because you're on a paranormal show and you wrote a book that it's you know, it's not it's in the realm of this, right? And so what, sent you down the path of, being interested in this sort of stuff?
Yeah, it started just when I was very young. There was like a few TV programs that were very popular. One of them was In Search of with the late great Leonard Nimoy. He
Yeah.
was the host of that, and they had really interesting episodes. They had paranormal things. They had stuff on UFOs, Atlantis, ancient civilizations. So from the time I was a kid, watching those types of programs, I was hooked. And I was the kid at the school that would go to the library and whatever books they had, like on any kind of paranormal, subject or Bermuda Triangle or Atlantis, I would be the kid that would be checking them out. So started when I was very, very young. And then I had a really interesting experience when I was 16 years old with my family. We lived in an apartment, and we had some friends of the family that we have known for many, many years. And they would get together with my parents on the weekends and play cards together. And we've known them for a very long time. And the husband's name was Tom, and his wife was named Patty. And Patty was a very tall lady. She was like 6'2", huge hands. She was a sweetheart. She knew my mom for many, many years, and they were good friends. They had worked together. And unfortunately, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and her husband was working for a transportation agency, and he was a sticker in a facility while he was at work. And my dad at the time, he had injured his back and he was on disability. And so he told Tom, he said, well, instead of putting her in a care center, why don't you just drop her off over here? I can play cards with her. And then when you get off work, you can pick her up. So it was a good arrangement. And one day she was over at our apartment playing cards, and unfortunately she had a seizure, and
Mm.
she died in our apartment very, very suddenly. And it wasn't long after that we began to hear knocking, knocking on the door, knocking on the walls, knocking on the windows. And, there'd be like a loud pounding at the door, and we'd open the door and there would be no one there. There would be a knock on the window, we'd open the blinds and no one there. And I remember sitting in the living room with my whole family, and there was this loud pounding on the door, and my dad got up and opened the door, and there was literally no one there. And my dad was kind of old school tough guy. He didn't really believe in the paranormal, anything like that, but I remember looking at the expression on his face and just seeing that he was afraid. He was scared, and we couldn't figure this out. And what's interesting is when Patty would come over, she would knock on the door and it would be very loud, and my dad would actually tease her. He'd say, ease up on the door, Patty, you're going to break the door down. And it was that loud kind of knocking. And this really perturbed all of us. We didn't know what to make of it. It had gone on for days, and my mom mentioned it to our next door neighbors. They were an older couple, and the wife, she was very religious. I don't know if she was, I think she was Christian. I don't know from what religion, but she told my mom, she goes, could I come over and I'll bring a Bible over and I'll bring some holy water, and I'd like to read some passages and sprinkle some holy water in your apartment. And my mom was like, absolutely, because we do not know what to do here in this situation. And so this lady comes over, and I remember being at the apartment, and she opens up this old Bible. She's starting to read passages and sprinkle holy water. And I'm kicking myself because I wish I would have stayed through the whole event. But I was 16 years old, and I was a little kind of freaked out. And I
Mhm.
was like, I think I'm going to go hang out at my friend's house. And my sister stayed there. And so the second half of the story, she relayed to me, and this lady is reading passages, and then all of a sudden her voice starts to change. Her voice gets very deep, and my sister said it was like she was speaking in another voice. And she said, "This is Patty." And she goes, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you guys. I just didn't get a chance to say goodbye, and I want to tell you goodbye." And and anyway, she goes around to each of the rooms, sprinkles holy water, leaves, and then after that, the knockings completely stop. No, no more knockings. So that experience really kind of opened my mind. I believed in the paranormal, but until you actually have an experience, with the paranormal, it's a whole different level.
Mhm.
And so that really, really opened my eyes.
That is so, it is so interesting, and it's heartwarming too. I mean, obviously out of something so sad, right? Losing a
Hmm.
friend
Mhm.
and in your apartment, and it must have been very scary. And because there's so much energy there, like, why you left. I mean, when there's energy like that in a space, especially if you're stirring it up and giving them more energy, which
Hmm.
is what happened because she was able to come through. Um, that's scary. That's
Mhm.
very, I mean, that's overwhelming in a lot of cases, especially for teenagers, right?
Yeah.
But that was, I mean, it's so interesting to me on so many levels that the religious woman from next door was a vessel too. She was
Hmm.
able to relay a message. Do you know, like, if she remembered that message, giving that message?
I do not know. I was so kind of overwhelmed with the whole situation that I don't even remember ever talking to that lady again. I think like a year or two later we moved from that place. But yeah, I don't remember conversing with her about it at all. I was still a little shocked. I really didn't even talk about it very much to any of my friends or anything, like that. It wasn't until years and years later when, conversation about paranormal came up with some friends. I said, "Oh yeah, I had an experience," but I kind of kept that to myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Gosh, that's so interesting. I love that story so much. Thank
Yeah,
you
Yeah,
for
it
sharing that.
and it wasn't, when it was going on, it was scary, but I didn't feel like threatened, like it was some type of evil energy or
Mhm.
demonic energy.
Right.
I didn't feel that.
No, and I think a lot of times spirits don't even mean to scare us, like Patty said. Like, that's not the first time I've heard something like that, where
Mhm.
I'm not trying to scare you, I'm just trying to show that I'm here, sort of thing.
Mhm.
Hmm.
I've heard that so many times. So I find it so interesting, because how else can you imagine being invisible to all of your friends and family, and like you're like, I'm right here, and there's
Mhm.
movies about it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm right
Right.
here and nobody can see me. That's so frustrating. And so, like, you don't mean to scare them, but you don't. So
Yeah.
I'm so glad that she was able to have a mouthpiece to say, I didn't mean to scare you, I'm moving on now, just wanted to say,
Yes.
thank you, goodbye at the end, you
Yeah,
know
I mean, it's like trying to like putting myself in that situation of like being the ghost or the entity. Like if I found something that worked, if knocking worked, I'm gonna knock the hell out of that
We keep
window,
doing it. Yeah.
right? And keep doing it until like I, get enough energy or get another way to kind of get you to notice me. And um, it is a really cool story. I shared a couple family stories that, were similar, where people came to kind of say goodbye. And, to have that closure is sort of priceless in itself, right? Um,
Yes.
so, but yeah, like I can imagine your fear probably was heightened also to see someone like, your dad, who's like the
Yes.
man's man, who also is also afraid, right?
Hmm.
And so when you see that, and I can remember at times in my childhood when adults in my life all of a sudden showed fear, and then that instantly escalated things, which
Yes.
kind of go back to what Jess said, like, that energy that stirs everything up even more and gives, you know, more energy into the entity, maybe even to do something. So
Mhm.
um, scary story. Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing.
Yeah, and there's another one that my mom told me about my grandfather. Now, my
Mhm.
grandfather, his name was Floyd. I'm named after him, and he passed away, gosh, when my mom was probably 7 or 8. She was pretty young when he had
Yeah.
died of a heart attack. And
Oh.
he was just a amazing man. And he always would dress very nicely, and he would always wear a fedora. And I was told he looked like Marlon Brando too. I do have a few photos of him, and he really did.
Yeah.
Oh.
And my mom told me this story. This was probably 4 years, 5 years after he had passed. Maybe not even that long. But my mom, I come from on my mom's side Italian family, and she was with her mom and her sister and her sister's husband, and they were at their house across the street from where my grandmother and my mom lived. This is in Portland, Oregon. And they were all over there visiting, and my grandmother said, to my mom, I need you to go back to the house and get something. And it was just across the street. But my grandmother was very, very protective. So even though it was just right across the street, my grandmother standing there in the window watching my mom leave the house to go across the street. And I think my aunt was watching too, and her husband, they're all kind of watching her go across the street. She walks across the street, goes into the house, shuts the door, and then this man on the same side of the street is walking, and he's wearing a nice suit, and he's got a fedora, and they can't see his face. He literally walks up the steps and goes in after my mom into the house. And of course, my grandmother is going hysterical because who is this stranger, like literally following my daughter into the
Mhm.
house? So she's screaming, and they all run across the street. My uncle grabs a shotgun, and they go into the house, and they find my mom, and they said, "Who is that man? Is there a man in the house with you?" And my mom's saying, "There's no one here. I just walked in here. There's no one that came in here." And so in the meantime, my uncle is scouring the house with a shotgun looking for this intruder, and come to find out they found no one there. And so my grandmother firmly believes that that was the ghost of my grandfather, who always wore a fedora, and
Mhm.
that's what he had on. And they searched the house and did not find anything.
That's
Interesting.
crazy. Yeah, totally
He was
interesting.
showing himself. That's interesting. I mean, maybe he was saying like I'm still here. I'm protecting her.
Yeah,
That's
watching
kind of
over little angel.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Well, thanks for sharing that one too, Floyd.
Yes, yes, my pleasure.
Did that freak your mom out, or what? Did it make her feel kind of warm? What do you know?
When she was telling me this story, I don't know what she felt at the time, but my mom was very calm, and it almost seemed like it was kind of reassuring to her, like, yeah, like my dad was still there with me
Mm,
Mhm.
in some form.
yeah, that's so nice. Thank you for sharing that. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Those were cool, really cool stories. Um, Funny enough, this weekend I was on a few showings. Again, if you haven't listened to the podcast before, I'm a realtor, by day and night and weekends, and
All the time, 24/7.
basically yes. Um, but I was on a showing this weekend with a really nice couple. They are friends of friends that were referred to me. And they have a daughter. She's about like 1.5, super cute. So we were at a house that's kind of set up in the woods. It was really cool, like a beautiful setting up in the woods. And we walked into this house, and I'm like, God, it's freezing in here. All I could think was, it's so cold. And I'm like, they need to turn their air up. Like, what the heck? Come to find out, there's no air conditioning in this house. Just throwing that out there. No air conditioning. So I was so cold, and it was 77 degrees outside. So it was warm, you know? And it was kind of an overcast day. It wasn't anything like, you know, super sunny, but still, like, we would go out on the porch and it was warm, you know? So the house shouldn't have been that cold. But I was just kind of thinking to myself, like, dang, so cold. So we go into the living room. This living room is like, it's not like a typical living room that you see. It is, you walk in. So let me back up. You go into the house, you walk into like this just like room that you're not really sure what to do with. That leads into a kitchen. And then you go down a hallway where you would expect to be like all the bedrooms. And they are there, but also there's a door to your left that leads into a huge just living room, which is so weird. And it was like I said, it was an overcast day. So the living room only had like one big, I don't remember if it was a slider or like one big window, but it was dark in there, really dark. And it had some bookshelves, and it had a fireplace that had these beautiful painted tiles all around it. And this house isn't old. I think it was 1978, not old. And it had a wooden like mantle all the way up to the ceiling, which not a high ceiling, but you know. So we walk into that room, and I get immediately dizzy. And to me, that's a sign of one of two things. It's either a sign of these floors are uneven, and so I have the funhouse effect, which happens often. You know, I'm in a lot of houses where the floors are uneven, or it's a sign that I'm near a spirit, a ghost, something like that. So, I'm looking at the floors, and I'm looking at the bookshelves too, because I was like, are the bookshelves uneven? Like, what is going on? I'm so dizzy in here. I can't stand it. And I'm like, the floors, nope, these floors are fine. I'm like pressing in on them, you know, foot by foot, like, okay, nope, everything's even. I look at the bookshelf, I'm like, nope, that's even. So we walk up to the mantle because it is so interesting, right? And it looks like it's like this, it's not wood paneling like you would think it, but it's like it looked like a panel that opens above the fireplace. It looked like there was a safe behind it. And the husband of the couple said, I almost expect there to be a safe behind this. And I was like, I know, it's weird. It looks like it opens. So I did a knock, like the shave and a haircut. Like I felt like somebody told me, like, do shave and a haircut. Like, and so I did that on the thing because I was like, you know, maybe there's a secret knock that opens that. I was just being silly, you know, that will have the safe open. So then I didn't finish it. I just kept talking to the wife, and the husband's behind me with the daughter. And all of a sudden I'm talking to the wife, we're explaining something, I don't even know what it was, and we all hear. And I continue talking for like a second, and then I'm like, you know what, hold on, I gotta know. So I turn behind me and I go, hey, to the husband, did you do that? Did you finish that? And he was like, no, I thought you did. And I'm like, okay, so you did hear it? And he goes, yeah. And I'm like thinking, like, did the baby do it? And I'm like, no, she's like up in his arms at this point. And like, how would a baby do? And she's 1.5, like she's not gonna, you know. And I look at the wife, and she's wide-eyed, and I was like, well, I know she didn't do it because I'm talking to her and I'm like facing her, and she could see both myself and her husband, so she knows that both of us did not do it. And I was like, but you did hear it, right? I'm not crazy. You heard it. And she was like, yeah, I heard it. So
Wow.
I was like, okay, so it is a spirit. And then I just did my little like tune in thing a little bit, and I did tell her that I do have intuitive abilities, at that moment, because I just kind of like felt it out a little bit. And I was like, do you believe in this stuff? Do you believe in like the paranormal ghost things? She said, I'm on the fence. I don't know. And I'm like, okay, well, like, let me just tell you what I'm sensing here. Um, so, and then like I did get like kind of a download of like who this person was. I won't share it just because I don't have
Yeah.
validation on it at all. I kind of want to call the other agent and just ask her like if it's okay to ask some questions, but I don't know. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. I'm not sure. I don't need that kind of reputation. Like she's calling
Says
and
the co-host of a paranormal podcast.
I'm just in like the real estate community, just being like,
No.
oh, there's that like psycho. She'll tell you if your house is haunted. So
Could be another hook into getting more clients.
yeah, I mean, some people do appreciate it.
Yeah.
There will be unprompted people that will say, and they don't know me and I don't know them that well. They just know me as a real estate professional. And they will say like, well, I just don't want a haunted house. And then I'll be like, well, you're in luck. I can help you with that. You know? So, but I mean, because in New York State, you do not have to disclose if a house has had a murder in it or
Mm,
anything like that, unless it is an attraction, like
mm,
a famous haunted house like the
Hmm.
Amityville Horror House.
right.
Hmm.
They must disclose that it's haunted, and I'm using quotations for those not watching. Because of the just the traffic or the sheer number of people that are interested in it. So
Wow, that is
Yeah.
an amazing story.
it was neat. I don't know. I was
Yeah.
excited. I think my clients were a little, well, at least the wife was a little scared, but now
Mhm.
she said she listened to our podcast.
Great.
Wow. Wow.
We're-
Yeah.
Have you ever had any experience like that in any of the other houses that you were showing as well, or has that been the only one? Oh,
No, I have. Yeah, I
yeah.
have. We'll do a whole real estate episode at some
Yeah.
point.
Because I have some
Okay.
stories too.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
just a lot of interesting things that have happened in homes, but
Mm.
yeah, we'll do a whole episode on it at some point, but apparently they keep happening, which is good.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and we could do it here, but we do want to like share a little bit more about you, Floyd, and like the things that you're doing, and so you shared your paranormal stories, which are really cool,
Yeah.
to hear and terrifying at the same time for the people that were kind of experiencing them. But also like you talked about it kind of leading up to your interest in the paranormal, and something that we haven't really featured on the show yet really are other types of entities outside of like aliens and ghosts. And I know you've written that book, and what kind of led you to kind of to explore something like that, the red-haired giants, right? Like
Yeah,
what built up to that?
it's a really unusual topic, and I look back and I'm just kind of surprised, like how did I end up, on this subject and writing a book about it? Well, probably about 8 years ago, I heard a presentation by a researcher named Jim Vieira. He's a researcher into ancient civilizations, and he's also a stonemason as well. And he started researching these structures, these stone structures that he would come across in his travels in the United States, that were very unusual. They didn't look like they were Native American, and they didn't have much context. He would go to the local town historical society and try to research on these structures. They were very well made. Historians would or archaeologists would say, oh, those are just, colonial root cellars. And he was a stonemason, so he was looking at these structures and going, there is entirely too much work and effort put into these things to be a root cellar. Plus, there was no evidence that there was any kind of hinged doors to these structures. So if they were root cellars or storage for any kind of food or anything, why would you have no door on it in the middle of the woods? The critters are just going to go right in and devour
Mhm.
whatever is in there. So it didn't make sense to him. So he would go to these local historical societies and try to research. Couldn't find out too much about them, but in the process, he stumbled across these reports of these giant skeletons being dug up. And he was like, what is this? And, he started researching more and started finding more and more of these accounts. Some of these skeletons range from 7 feet in height to 9, 10 feet, 11 feet. I mean, even taller in some cases. And these newspaper articles would talk about the town physician like measured the bones, and then they were going to call in the Smithsonian Institution to do some more research on these things, and they would come in, they would take the bones, and they would simply disappear. And he did a presentation, Jim did a presentation on this, and I was just captivated because he kept referring to all these different newspaper articles. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. Could this all be a hoax? Could all these accounts be like hoaxes, or maybe a mismeasurement of the bones? I mean, what's going on here? So I started subscribing to all these old newspaper databases, and I'm like, I want to see if I can find these articles myself. And it didn't take long, and I started accumulating a mass amount of articles in North America of these giant skeletons being unearthed. In some cases, some of the skeletons had what were called a double row of teeth in the up, and I found specific references in the upper jaw, in the upper row, and little anomalies. And in some cases, some of the skeletons had 6 digits on the hands, which I thought was unusual, because I go back to in the biblical accounts. There's an account where everyone's familiar with David and Goliath, and
Yeah.
Goliath was a giant, and he also had brothers too. And one of those brothers was named Saph. And in the Bible, it said he had a double row of teeth, and he had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. And I thought, this is just really interesting. And so I started researching more, compiling more articles, and I came across a story that really captivated me because there was just so much evidence to it. And that is the Lovelock Cave. And the Lovelock Cave is in Nevada. And the Paiutes, the local native people in that area, in their oral tradition, they talk about a race of red-haired giants, and they referred to them by various names. One of them was called the Satika, which means tule eater, and tule is a water plant, and there used to be a lake in that area. It's now dried out, but it would have it was very marshy, and it had a lot of these tule, these water plants, and allegedly these giants would make things out of these water plants, everything from duck decoys that they used in hunting to even clothing, baskets, and things like that. So they were known as the Satika, and they also were known as the people eaters because they were cannibalistic, and they were a very violent tribe, and they were very evil. They would attack local tribes, they would attack the Paiutes, and they would cannibalize their victims, and even going so far as to dig up the dead to feast upon the dead. And the Paiutes say that the favorite part of the Satika of a human to eat were the thighs, and they were very evil. And the Paiutes finally got tired of being attacked, and they banded together with other local tribes and waged war on these giants. And it lasted 3 years. So in their oral tradition, they said we fought these red-haired giants for a 3-year period, and the final battle culminated at Lovelock Cave. They cornered the last of these giants in the cave, and they threw brush in front of the cave, and they lit flaming arrows. And they shot the flaming arrows, lit the brush on fire, and burnt the giants to death. Now, some of the Paiutes believe that not all the giants were killed, that some of them did escape. And it was in 1911, there were 2 guano miners, and guano is bat dung. It was used in fertilizer, and I think in explosives too, that were mining this cave in 1911, and they uncovered a number of artifacts and these giant skeletons, some of which still had long red hair attached. And they notified the local university and said, we found these skeletons, we found these ancient artifacts. And then I think it was the next year in 1912 that the first official excavation took place, and over 10,000 artifacts came out of that cave, And I believe around 50 to 60 skeletons came out of the cave. Now, what was interesting is the skeletons disappeared. They were never put on public display. However, some of the artifacts were distributed to a number of different museums, some of which can be seen to this day. The skeletons disappeared. Now, there's a local museum there called the Humboldt Museum, and they ended up with some unusual skulls. And many people believe that they were skulls that came out of Lovelock Cave and probably were taken out of the cave prior to the excavation, which was in 1912. And these skulls were very anomalous and they were never put on public display. However, they were put in the basement of the museum in cupboards, and you had to ask the curator to even look at these skulls. And so as I investigated the story, I thought this is really interesting because we have a lot of Paiute accounts of these giants, and there are artifacts that came out of the cave, one of which was a Thule sandal, a giant sandal made from that water plant. And I was in communication with the Nevada State anthropologist, and he seemed to be, his name was Gene Hattori. He seemed to be open-minded about these red-haired giants, and I had done some research and uncovered some of his videos that he had made and some writings about these giants. And he sent me a photograph of an alleged Bigfoot print, which obviously was gigantic, with this sandal that came out of the cave over it, and it looked like it would fit this foot. And so the Thule sandal was about 17 inches in length, and I did the calculation to shoe size, and that comes out to about a 29 shoe size. And I've not found a shoe. I was looking at all the professional basketball players and everything. What is the record? And a size 29 blows that out of the water.
Yeah.
And I also was able to find some photographs of the skulls. Now, the skulls are no longer in the museum. I contacted the museum when I first started doing my research because I wanted to go see the skulls. And the curator told me, "Oh no, they're no longer here. Those were repatriated back to the native tribes." There was a law passed in the 90s called NAGPRA, which was the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act, which basically said to the museums, if you have Native American remains, they need to, if you can find the tribe where they came from, they need to go back to the tribe, which I'm all for that. That's how it should be.
Absolutely.
And so apparently the curator said that they were repatriated. These skulls were repatriated. And however, I did find some photographs that were taken about 40, 50 years ago by another researcher named Don Monroe. And I got permission to use some of the photos that he took and publish them in my book. And there is one in particular of this massive skull, and it shows it next to two smaller, like normal size skulls, but this skull is like almost double the size of the other skulls. And what was interesting, in the upper row of teeth, can you guess how many teeth were there?
A double row.
It was a double row, and it had a patch of hair still attached to the skull, and it was red. It was reddish in color. And so, the more I researched, the more evidence I uncovered, not only in the Paiute oral tradition, not only with photographic evidence, artifacts that came out of there, the Thule sandal, and there's other artifacts too that are quite anomalous. There's a pestle, which is like a grinding stone that the native peoples would use, and they found one near Lovelock Cave, and this was in an archaeological report that I read, and it was like 35 to 40 pounds, which is way heavier, way larger than a normal pestle would be.
Yeah.
In fact, the archaeologist was like, "This is like, way bigger than what we would normally find." And it would take an immensely large, powerful individual to sit there and, use a 40-pound grinding stone, to hammer away at, whatever they're grinding.
That's a crazy, crazy story. I mean, Jess, what do you think about things like this?
I just think, like, if they weren't such jerks to other tribes. They could have made a killing on like, can you imagine grinding like and being like, wow, look at all this like really fine grain, like
No
they would have
kidding.
paid big bucks
Yeah.
for fine grain like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, see, it gets interesting because one of the original discoverers, one of the guano miners, his name was John Reed, and so when he went into the cave and found those artifacts, that wasn't his first time in the cave. When he was a teenager, he was friends with Natchez, who was the son of Chief Winnemucca, a very prominent native chief in that area, Paiute chief.
Mm.
And some horses on his parents' ranch escaped, and then him and his friends went on this mission to retrieve these horses. And in the process, they ended up near Lovelock Cave, and there was a downpour. And John was like, "Hey, why don't we just go into this cave, instead of getting soaked out here?" And Natchez says, "No, we're not going in that cave because the spirits of the red-haired giant still haunt the cave." And
Mhm.
he told John the story of the red-haired giants and actually took him to the front entrance of the cave. And was pointing to him in some of the little cracks. You could still see projectile points that had been shot in there from his ancestors to
Mhm.
burn
Wow.
these giants out. And he's saying, I'm not going in there because there's evil spirits here. And of course, John, he was like 15 years old. He was a real adventurous young man and wanted to kind of prove his bravery amongst his friends. And he's like, it was dark, and he's like, okay, well, I won't go in there tonight, but I'm gonna go in there tomorrow morning. There was no way Natchez could talk him out of it. So they waited in the morning, and then he lit up a torch and he went into this cave, hoping to find, skeletons of these giants or some evidence of them. But all he found were huge piles of bat dung that were in there. And so he didn't find anything at that time that he went in there.
Mhm.
But it was ironic that later, as an adult, he would become a miner and end up back in Lovelock Cave. He knew the story, he knew the legend, and then he uncovered these skeletons and artifacts later on.
Did the book cover, I mean, it probably doesn't go down this road, but has anybody ever like did those miners have any paranormal experiences or anything?
I do not remember hearing about the miners, any reports of the miners having paranormal experience. However, there was another really kind of weird story associated with the excavation of these giants. So even in the archaeological record, it says the largest of the specimens, the largest of the skeletons, was given to a local fraternal lodge to be boiled and used for initiation purposes.
Ew, what?
And
Jeez.
I thought, what on earth? Like, this is even stating that in the archaeological report. Like, these skeletons were never shown to the public, but yet it's saying that the largest of these skeletons was given to a local fraternal lodge to be used in some kind of initiation rite, I was like, what on earth? This is
Yeah, why would you
really
use
strange.
human
Yeah.
remains? I mean, even if they're humanoid
Yeah.
remains,
Same.
to me, I mean, that would ping like most people to be like, wow, this is special. We should call somebody
Mhm.
Right.
at a
Well, it
higher
gets
pay grade.
interesting. It gets interesting because Jess, I thought the same thing. I thought, wow. I mean, do local do fraternal societies, or at least some of them, have they ever, or do they use any kind of human remains in their rituals? And so I started researching that, and I reached out to the local historical society in that area because I thought, well, if that is true, then if I can find one of those fraternal organizations that are around, maybe, just maybe, I could find out where it ended up. If anyone was going to fess up to it, which I doubted, but I thought I'm going to give it a try. So I reached out to the historical society, and they said there are still two fraternal lodges that are in that area. One of which is the Knights Pythias, and the other is a Freemasonic lodge.
Mhm.
And so I started doing a little research in both of those fraternal societies to see, is there any evidence here that there was human remains ever used? And when I was looking into Knights Pythias, in one of their rituals, they do say that they have a skull that they
Mhm.
use, a skull and some bones. And that was only like one reference that I found. in the Knights Pythias. However, with the Freemasonic Lodge, and I did a lot of research, I found in a number of cases they allegedly did use human bones. In fact, I found some articles in Australia that go back maybe 10 or 15 years ago, where some Freemason lodges got in trouble because they were having some renovation done on their lodges, and the workers were noticing that there was human skulls in there and other bones, and so they reported it to the police, and the police
Gosh.
did the police did an investigation, and come to find out these Freemason lodges in Australia were using ancient Aboriginal bones,
Mhm.
skulls and other bones in their initiation rites, and they got in trouble for it. So there is evidence that some
As
of
they
these,
should.
yes,
Yeah.
as they
Yeah.
should, absolutely, absolutely. And their excuse was, when they were confronted with this, well, is that, oh, we do a ritual with our members to kind of teach them the importance of time and how time is fleeting, right?
Mm.
And so, they're bringing in these bones, and I'm like thinking, well, you could probably convey that message a number of other ways
Yeah.
without using human remains.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a better way to do that. So yeah, that was a really interesting kind of a twist that I was taken on when I was investigating this.
That is
Fascinating.
super, super interesting. I hate to even admit this, but what popped in my head was Joshua Jackson from Dawson's Creek movie, The Skulls, which was about a fraternal
Okay.
organization that, like, did have all these traditions and stuff. I think there were some skulls involved, but like, of course, it
Yeah,
was a very Hollywood, like,
Yeah.
kind of thriller horror kind of thing, based on almost some of that like conspiracy theory kind of things that are all twisted together.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I mean, some of these organizations, like, that tradition has been there for generation upon generation, and they're using the same things. And, you know, um, I remember even like in fraternal things that we did, we didn't have skulls or human bones, but like questions about like, well, what is this stuff really? I mean, it's been in the fraternity for years, but what is it really? And like
hmm,
the current brothers might not even necessarily know, what this
right.
bone is, right? But that's freaky. Could you imagine being that construction worker? I'm like, we're gonna go,
Oh,
move, this is a load bearing wall, but we're gonna, install some. Oh, skulls. I'm gonna call the
yeah.
cops now, right?
I would
That
I would get
actually,
I'd get out of there as quickly as possible.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so that actually just happened here in Rochester.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, so well, again, real estate. Um, somebody's client was digging a new garage and they just happened upon some bones.
Oh
So
God.
it's like some human remains. Um, they think from like the 1800s, but
Hmm.
everything had to stop. Obviously, the construction
Right.
workers were like, we're reporting this. The
Yeah.
cops came in and it has to stop everything. But yeah, I mean, they were like, oh, it's just they're from the 1800s and we'll take it off your hands and you can continue doing what you were doing. Um,
Take it off your hands.
yeah, well, so the house was
We're
built in the
just gonna take this.
1950s. The
That's
house was built in
crazy.
1950s, so either so somebody was it was land
Yeah.
from something,
Yeah.
at some point. But it's actually kind of common for
Yeah.
that to happen. Obviously, I mean, people
Well,
have.
when you think about it, America, like was built on, even colonial times, you had family plots and
Mhm.
Yeah,
those things, like, I mean, even the ones that existed today, they're not maintained. And after a while, they look like they've returned to the earth. They're
Right,
stones, but they're flat, they're broken, they're cracked, so you don't even know they're graves.
right.
But Floyd, thanks for sharing all of this, like your paranormal stories, definitely the information about your book, and like we're gonna put in the show notes where people can get your book to learn more.
Yeah, it's really
Um,
cool.
it's really, really cool. And I urge our audience to kind of reach out to Floyd, connect with him, if you're interested in learning more about all of this. Is like, it's great. We probably could have a whole nother episode talking more about the
easily.
red hair giants, right? Um, but thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Nick and Jessica. And before I forget, there is a movie that I think the producer took the story of the red-haired giants and made it into kind of a Western horror movie. It's
Mhm.
called Bone Tomahawk, and it
Oh,
came
cool.
out probably 8 or 9 years ago. It's with Kurt Russell.
Oh,
And
wow.
if you like scary movies,
Or Kurt Russell.
definitely Kurt Russell. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks for that
Check it out.
suggestion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Bone Tomahawk. All right. I recently just started watching the show Evil on
I
Netflix.
just heard about that. I heard
Hmm.
that's very good.
It's interesting so far. I mean, obviously it's like super, cheesy, but
Yeah.
but it's like a good like, I can shut my brain off and just watch it sort of
Yeah.
thing. If you don't like scary stuff, don't watch it. But but also, why are you here?
Well, yeah, why are you listening to this show?
Exactly. Yeah. You're in the wrong podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Well,
well, thank you so much, Floyd. This is really cool. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, right now my website's being revamped, so it's not working. You can purchase my book at bookbaby.com. I'm a self-published author, and I appreciate if anyone's interested in purchasing my book to go there. I'm also on Amazon and Barnes and Noble as well.
well, thank you again, Floyd.
Fantastic.
It's been a
Yeah.
pleasure. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And Jess, I
Um,
think it's about that time.
it is about that time. And so whether it is an Aperol spritz, which is what I'm feeling today because it's a nice summer day, or ghosts, keep your spirits up.